Viewers, we are back with Sri RVS Mani, and we're going to talk about a very important topic today, the role of NAC in making India become almost totally reliant on China for all its imports. How systematically things were put in motion, and that inadvertently led to a point where by 2006 or 7 or so, India was practically importing everything from China. And there is a huge lead up to that, and there is a very interesting story that we're going to talk about today. And this starts with the 2004 I would say selection of Manmohan Singh as the prime minister. And since Mrs. Sonia Gandhi could not become the prime minister, there was a National Advisory Council, or the NAC, that was formed, and this had all the powers and no responsibilities. And it starts from there. And let us join Sri Mani and have him tell us how things work through. He was not in Home Affairs at that time. He was in a different department. So Mr. Mani, please walk us through what happened after 2004.
2004, the mandate was a surprise. Even the Congress was pleasantly surprised to have had so many seats. Notwithstanding that, the Congress still had lesser number of seats than BJP, but a secular lobby, the bogey of secularism, came together, cutting across their ideology. I don't think these politicians have any ideology, to come out with an opportunistic alliance of the United Progressive Alliance, in which we had the Paswan group, we had the Lalu Prasad Yadav, we had communists also supporting from outside or inside or whatever it is. And the bigger driver was the Congress party. But in the same vein, it was expected that the Congress leader Sonia Gandhi would be the prime minister. Against this, there was a lot of public outcry. Some politician, in fact, had very stoutly protested against this, including Sushma Swaraj, who said that she will be forced to go into a mourning if Sonia, a foreign-born person, becomes a prime minister. Hence, Sonia Gandhi did smell the challenges and offered the prime ministership to Sri Manmohan Singh, Dr. Manmohan Singh. This is the beginning of the 2004 UPA government. But in essence, she did not want to let go of the power. So the entire scheme of NAC was conceived, and the constitution of NAC is through only a non-statutory resolution. It is known as under no teeth of law. And all the NAC members were, I don't know how they were selected. We had John Dries, about whom I have written in my book also, the partner of Bela Bhatia, one of the chief Maoist supporters. They are perpetuators, they are fund collectors, they are urban Naxals. Very renowned. We had Aruna Roy, a former IAS officer who could not deliver her services to be restrained or constrained by the rule of law, and so to have a freedom, she quit the IAS and became what they call it as the activist within brackets. Activist also, we know how the finances do come through, so she became an activist. We had such similar people. Please.
She was also the mentor of Mr. Arvind Kejriwal. And this whole relationship between Aruna Roy and Arvind Kejriwal is detailed in my book, The Rise and Fall of AAP. And AAP seems to be at least able to hold its seats in Delhi, but at least outside of Delhi, it's now completely collapsed. So please continue.
So this is the profile of the NIC members. OSD to chairman, Sonia Gandhi herself was the chairperson of NAC. And another interesting, very, very interesting thing about the National Advisory Committee was the first director, first officer who was appointed to the NAC was the director NAC, and she was also doubling as the chairperson, private secretary to the chairperson. And she was an IAS officer with a very checkered record that she was a DM Godhra when the Godhra carnage happened in 2002.
Wow, that's a revelation.
People can cross check this. This is a fact. This is a matter of fact. So this is what is the NAC all about. And NAC, the issue of NAC was never challenged. Of course, some people went through the back door of the office of even the opposition then, of Office of Profit case, in which the judgment was ambivalent, trying to accommodate the chairperson of NAC. And some minor changes were made. That is the structure of NAC. And this is the beginning of a very, very interesting chapter of next forthcoming 10 years. About the impact it did on China. The handouts they gave it to China, 2008 party-to-party agreement is all over the news nowadays. That was, I don't know what type of agreement. I have not seen the agreement. We were aware of it. In addition to that, there were several things happening. See, NAC made many proud statements about setting up the National Manufacturing Competitiveness Council. We will make India competitive. We will ensure that the manufacturing, including the mining sector, contributes more than the then 17 or 15% contribution to the GDP. They said that we will raise it to 21%, 25%, whatever it is. Similarly, I don't know, manufacturing, there was another committee formed. And incidentally, the manufacturing sector committee, NMCC chairperson, was one Dr. Krishnamurthy, who had been in the very illustrious career as a public sector manager, who had turned around the Maruti, who had turned around the BHEL and SAIL and all that. He had been a member of the planning commission also, but he had been out of touch for almost 13 years. So some sort of Rip Van Winkle waking up, he was asked to come back and join and take over the mantle of increasing the productivity. What extent we did, we will come to that later. We also had one Arjun Sengupta committee for the small scale and such similar committee for the reviving the public sector and heavy industry, public sector enterprises in the BPRSP or something like that. It was not. None of them did any job worth it. When I was talking about the NMCC, I had an interaction with one gentleman called A. Sahasranamam, a very, very excellent officer of the JNK cadre, retired. He had been, in fact, now people are talking of the massive export of leather products from India. During the 80s and 90s, he was the person who was the director of the Council for Leather Exports, and he really smelled the opportunity and delivered a lot. So this is a matter of record. I am not cooking up anything. He is not my relative. In a sort of a semi-formal interaction with him, once he asked me, what has NMCC done? What is its salient? One single achievement, can you list it? And I had nothing. And before the NMCC, because of the institutionalized nature of the chairperson, every industry group, whether pharmaceutical, whether ready-made garments, whether textiles, whether petrochemical, downstream petrochemicals, fine chemical, everybody came weeping there. Sir, we require these changes. Otherwise, China, we are not able to match China in terms of their robust investments, etc. So all this information was being gathered there, but nothing was outcoming. Nothing was forthcoming out of that. And at the same time, China was strengthening its bases in their own sector, plus penetrating into India. They are pushing, see, especially, and the small industry and medium, the Arjun Sengupta committee he was an economist. He had very little knowledge of background or hands-on experience of managing enterprises. So it was sort of more theoretical orientation. And whatever he dished out is not known to me, but basically there also it was not covered with glory. On public sector, it was another sort of a duplication of effort, because most of the public sector by that time, which were sick, were already under the, see, out of the 250 odd central public sector, most of them, excepting the Navaratnas and mini Navaratnas, had already gone through the process of BIFR for the Sick Industries Act. So there was nothing he could have done except reinventing the wheel. But the issue was, all these things was happening. Concurrently, along with that, another domain of the government was implementing at the behest of the NAC, the Manrega. Prima facie, it looked like a very good scheme, but they were doing a lot of illusory work. Illusory work means work which was not required or which was done only on paper, but really not done. And they were getting 90 rupees per day those days, 540 rupees per work, husband per week, and husband and wife, both of them enrolled in Manrega, means it used to be around 2,000 to 3,000 rupees, or maybe 4,000 rupees, which was a princely amount to sustain themselves in a rural household. Those days, at those cost prices, because this is how it was worked out. As a consequence, there was a lot of de-skilling happening. Many people who could have otherwise done some productive job, either in the farm sector, or in the allied sector, or in sort of light assembly like puncher, or this type of small technical services they could have rendered, or even product making in their own small way. They abandoned all those and listed themselves as unemployed to get the benefit out of Manrega. So this also resulted in de-skilling of a huge population which refused to take up work, and the effect of this de-skilling is indelible. Why I am saying is indelible is, see, if few things I'll tell you. The present Pradhan Mantri, if you recollect, started with certain terminologies like Kaushal Bharat, Kushal Bharat. So he started a massive scheme of skill development in the country after 2014. It has really gathered a lot of momentum, but enrollments are still we are having a problem. I myself sought to implement a skill development scheme associated with implementation of a skill development scheme for the textile sector. I know why it is a problem, because of the Manrega and the subsequent de-skilling. People have lost their willingness to work. They are in a rural household, many people are happy with the 2,000 or 4,000 rupees plus the free, because it must be their own house, whatever thatched roof or whatever it is, and they can sleep anywhere. The environment is better and all that. No traveling and all. So there also we are suffering a lot, and this is a reality of India. So Kaushal Bharat, Kushal Bharat, in spite of all that, the enrollments are not up to the desired or targeted level, although it's a wonderful scheme. Similarly, Honorable Prime Minister also stated one thing, one more dictum of zero manufacturing, zero defect, zero effect. This has a very relevant point there. See, because of the inundation of Indian markets by the Chinese, which was of both poor quality and I don't know environmentally how much sustainable it was, how many eco-friendly it was, or the cycle of biodegradation would happen or not, because many things, in order to reduce their cost, they would they will use substances which would not be in the ecology's interest. These type of things did come up in many cases, and the Chinese market which flooded it, whether it is a case of Diwali utilities or the holy utilities for the holy gulal and all. Even they used to say that the gulal which was used was not so skin friendly and all. So zero effect, zero defect. He had started with these are all with the specific mind. I don't know how much of impact it has taken. So this is also one of the reasons. In addition to that, some of the, see for example, the Aruna Roy and Bela Bhatias, or including the Harsh Mandar, who was the advisor to Sonia NAC, or who was advisor to Sonia Gandhi ji and all, they were baking their bread in Chhattisgarh area. Those days it was being ruled by the Raman Singh government. I will tell you one interesting thing. We had the steel ministry polluting a huge water body in Baildila mines, one of the public sector under steel ministry, I think NMDC. And this effect, I have written in detail about this in my book. This was affecting the only source of potable water for the local tribes, and this was one of the reasons for going astray of the Naxals, who turned Naxals, because there was sort of a disaffection because the central public sector undertaking was doing it. Digvijay Singh, prior to 2001, was the chief minister of the combined Madhya Pradesh. He had never flagged it. Subsequently also, this was never made an issue out, and as a consequence, and the same Bela Bhatia, Jeon Rees's partner, or the same Aruna Roy or same Harsh Mandar used to go and protest about the deprivation, but they never really talked about the real deprivation of the people. What is the real problem? Why this Gondia area, or Baildila, or even the Kanker, or all those areas where it was used to be the top Naxal dens. What is the real problem? They never highlighted, they never fought for it. On the contrary, after a later stage, we had some NAC members also supporting that, and that was a envelope inside the India where a lot of potential for manufacturing localized goods existed, and that was killed by these NAC members. These are all matters of record. I am not speaking on myself. I am not getting into the NAC's role of some NAC member even supporting to release Kasab, because this topic is very focused. How they killed these local small-scale utilitarian industries, which was catering to the commercial needs of the country, the lower middle class, etc. Especially because the lower middle class and the commercial areas and all these areas, there's a high level of price sensitivity. The Chinese got away with using inferior products with lesser usage cycle, by pricing it so low that it looked very attractive to the user, especially at that level of strata of society. The quality consciousness was not there. So these are all some of the, and at the same time, when the Indian industries were weeping before the NMCC, they were weeping before the industry minister, Mr. Kamal Nath, followed by Mr. Anand Sharma, if nobody would really do anything. There was repeated issues saying that there is a need for a amendment to the contract labor legislation. There was a lot of need for labor legislation to be amended. The profile of the workers now joining the workforce is totally different from what it was envisaged and during the time of Factories Act, including the certain even the industrial layouts have changed, but they have to comply. They face the industrial Inspector Raj, they are being harassed. The single window has got no meaning. State governments take inordinately. So many issues were there, and the gestation periods where China could get a factory up in around 6 to 9 months, they had all. They could not even go through the clearance stage in that 6 to 9 months. All the environmental, this clearance, that clearance. So these were all being flagged in respect of big ticket items, but nobody would listen to them. You can corroborate with any of the top industrialists in the country who had called upon the leadership, PM's Council on Trade and Industry, everywhere, because this was systematically delayed to allow the Chinese to get into foothold into the place. Yes.
Sir, one could make the argument that Modi government has had 6 years to set right a lot of these things, and yet it looks like on the ground things haven't really improved. How would you answer that?
See, the mess created. See, the mess created is too much. It is not partly the issue is so deep rooted that it is not very easy to clear it with simply the policy challenges. Another reason is you track the background of the NAC people, and the same people now are filing all vexatious PILs like Mr. Yogendra Yadav.
Well, not just him, right? Yogendra Yadav, Harsh Mandar,
All of
everybody
them.
seems to be jumping in this. And in fact, some of them are also having some other things coming up now because of their role in the Shaheen Bagh riots and so on and so forth.
That's a totally different area, but even the normal course also, I have not said that one of the leading legal luminary, Mr. Harish Salve, had, in fact, he had predicted that in 2014 that these type of people will not allow the Modi government to deliver. And lot of vexation, something like you had the Toothukudi riot, Toothukudi litigation, that copper, sterlite copper. Or you
Yes.
have had so many others coming up in that. And this is one of the reasons the legal. I have been taking up certain issues with the legal reforms direct because the Chief Justice is also not, we cannot have his ear. He's also sitting in a myriad of around 50,000 cases in the Supreme Court alone and 3 crore cases all over India. So it will be, and many, and in spite of that, he is admitting these frivolous, vexatious PILs and also delivering them at a much faster rate. So there is some need for a introspection at the judicial level. I am sure it will happen. I have flagged it with the President of India on a quite few other. You know, I have been writing because
Yes.
I cannot find any other recourse than writing to the President. This is one set of story, and also, as I said, de-skilled labor have to be brought back to skilling. Not only skilling, another very interesting thing happened. So many engineering colleges were allowed to be opened in 2005 and all, 2005, 6, 7, that it became totally irrelevant. I don't know whether no curriculum was inspected, whether no enforcement of the utilities and hands-on experience to the children. So we are still stuck with a huge manpower, huge youth, unemployed youth count, in which they hold a BTech degree but they don't know engineering. I don't know whether they know even they are well versed in the elementary physics. It is a reality. For example, every state was making a political statement like Mayawati started the knowledge park, and the amount of engineering colleges, including a sweet shop owner, started an engineering college, which is now an international university. I'm not joking. Or maybe a provision or a grocery store fellow started an engineering college. You can go to Knowledge Park in Greater Noida and find out the number of engineering colleges. Many of them, of course, are now shutting down because they are now having empty rooms. So that also is a very, very major setback which was allowed. And one more interesting thing I would flag here, in 2005, the HRD minister extended certain benefits to the underprivileged community into the IITs and IIMs, and this was not with any heart bleeding for them, but this was a setup, because by virtue of this, the IITs would people who don't get into the IITs would get into the private sector engineering colleges or foreign universities, for which the agents of several foreign universities have supposed to have taken care or lobbied or whatever it is. This happened in 2005. And that also threw up a lot of real talent going out. IIT is being vitiated. And when the IITs get vitiated, then the quality goes down, the faculties don't come. So many things happen. The quality of faculty which comes into the IITs is much different from what when you are studying in the IIT. So there are multiple factors which were happening, and at the apex of that, the Gangotri of that was our friend National Advisory Committee. The entire, because see, National Advisory Committee, one person was the chairperson, and an idea will be thrown open. The concerned person who will have to then give it a legitimization process. Are you getting it?
Yes.
Even the most absurd idea will be very beautifully legitimized by either Aruna Roy or Shiva Kumar of UNICEF or whatever it is. I don't know, whomsoever it is. They will legitimize that with all their ornamental English and management terminology and all. And this is what was happening in NAC.
Well, now, so the steps, let's look a little further forward now. So one thing is MNREGA took away the need for someone to earn their livelihood when they could get comparable income by doing nothing, more or less nothing. And this government is forced to continue it, because in India, you cannot take anything away. The only thing you can do is to give. And this is a bad give, but be that as it may, it has been given, is being continued. Now, only good thing that Modi has done is to make sure that using the Jan Dhan Yojana, everybody gets a bank account, and therefore there is no loss in transmission. It comes as it is. The money comes from the government directly into the bank account. So that helps. Now, that alone is not going to do it. So you said that Kaushal and Kushal Yojana, I'm sorry, I missed the line, but
Kaushal Bharat, Kushal Bharat.
Yeah, Kaushal Bharat, Kushal Bharat will reskill people. But what is the incentive for someone to join this program when they are getting still MNREGA benefits?
See, that is one indelible damage MNREGA has done. That I told in the earlier, that is the reason the enrollment in the skilling processes are really a challenge for the in fact they have enrolled a lot of agencies who are given incentives to increase the enrollment. Transportation, food, all sorts of incentives are given, but this is how it is happening. Another one important factor I missed out is the demolition of all institutional financial agencies in India. See, in 1994, the ICICI started its retail banking operation as a separate vertical. ICICI was the main investor, and it started but later on the line got almost obfuscated, and now it is only ICICI Bank. There is no institutional financing agencies. IDBI also turned into a bank. IFCI, we don't know what is the status of it. This is as far of the three of the major institutional funding. We have a SIDBI, because institutional funding for big ticket projects especially is a huge problem. SIDBI does it for these small industries.
Small industries, right.
And there also, of course, our friend, our Prime Minister's intervention, the Mudra scheme, they have done a lot of good, very, very good things on the startups, investing. Instead of creating jobs, they are making creator of jobs and all that. it is a good takeoff, but what will be the result? As today, the takeoff is there, but we are yet to see the gestation period after the result. But other than that, which is the one institutional financing agency, we don't know. NABARD is again very sector specific, and NABARD is not a very autonomous institutional funding agencies per se, because it always has the Reserve Bank looking upon their head. And there is a very, very little leg space for anything like that. It's all politically motivated organization. Very difficult to even work there. So, which is the institution? This gap was filled by certain private lenders who landed into this. And public sector projects got arrested because a lot of investments in the ONGC and all, because they would ask for a government guarantee as the major equity holder in the projects. And general financial rules of the Government of India expressly proscribes giving government guarantee, excepting in certain cases. I don't know the exact rule 235 or something like that. Expressly in certain countries, which is a very almost a negative list. So this type of thing, where finance, where do you get the finance for big ticket projects, infrastructure finances? Some shady companies like ILFS and others entered, and you know what is the plight of this situation which happened. They also did that D&D in in one of the major achievements of ILFS is D&D Noida, Delhi Noida. After realizing their revenue, there was no exit clause. So for eternally they could have collected their revenue, except this matter came to light in a High Court judgment when they they stopped them from collecting the revenue. These type of shady companies, outfits were getting into infrastructure financing or big ticket financing. I know of a case which I exposed in the Pochampally Park, textile park, handloom park also. It's a matter of record in the government, but only these type of things have come. Otherwise, robust institutional agencies almost vanished out of the Indian industrial map. So, please.
Sir, one thing that you cannot fault this government for is intent. Modi government wants to do good by the people, and they understand the magnitude of the problem they have got on their hands. Now, this whole banking sector, two problems, right? The NPAs on the public sector banks, and then these non-banking sector has completely, NBFCs have completely kind of collapsed. Now, why are they then trying to merge the PSUs into bigger entities? What is the reason or the rationale behind that?
See, they have much more absorption capacity, because one unit goes sick otherwise. So maybe they are aggregating it and are trying to do some sort of what an aggregator does. That is the intent behind it. Otherwise, it should be best known for the government only, because in aggregation processes, certain synergic benefits are always flowing, and certain cost efficiencies also get into that. And that is the reason this attempted merger of banks have happened. But the banks are already walking in with their own liabilities. More importantly, the surfacey cases also, there is all these DRTs, when they give an order, see, supposing if I have a case and property pledged to me, I am an entrepreneur, I am a defaulter entrepreneur, I have pledged a property which is of 60 lakhs to say Union Bank of India, and CD property which is pledged to something like 3 crores pledged to some other bank, which now merged with Union Bank. Now the umbrella is much larger for the merged entity.
Right.
When a DRT order comes, they have a much larger umbrella, whichever they want to attach. 60 plus 3 crores. These type of benefits have also flown into this. So
I
this
see.
is a very vital point, because otherwise, if DRT gives orders on attachment with exclusivity,
Hmm.
what is pledged to me, but as a now single common entity, larger pledging can happen.
Now, could you expand DRT for our viewers, sir?
Debt recovery tribunals.
That's what I thought. I didn't want to go wrong. Okay, please continue.
So this is it's a tribunal which settles these cases of default loans and all that. But more importantly, this is one benefit we have. So I think maybe the government wanted to bring out that extricate a lot of. So this will ensure that more and more money is realizable on the NPAs than what was earlier being done. A potential has arisen now. The capacity to realize more is there.
Now, one of the things that happens when you merge banks is the headcount is not needed. First of all, when you merge, you don't need extra headcount, or you can be giving voluntary retirement to many people. Number one. Number two, because of UPI and other online transactional things, the number of people who are going to the bank to do day-to-day transactions. I remember my dad used to just go to the bank to get his passbook entries updated, and somebody would patiently write in a piece of paper with a pen and say, okay, this thing, and then you look at it and say, oh, okay, now I know. All those things are now automated. You can sit in your home, you can look at your smartphone, and you can log in to find out what are your balances, your transactions, and so on and so forth. Now, this would mean that at least even if they stop hiring for banks, that the banks will become more efficient, and thereby they'll be themselves having lesser overheads, isn't it? How is that working out?
See, certain areas see public sector, whether bank or in any other domain, have some certain attendant higher cost, which a private sector doesn't have. I'm not sitting on judgment over anything, but you require a official language division in every public sector. You require a vigilance division in every public sector. You require a central grievance officer, maybe a ombudsman, that. These are all additional costing for which, and these divisions do not work without a clerical support. So a lot of things happen. Then these reservation points and reservation rosters, maintenance of that, welfare officer. So these type of a lot of cluster of posts are compulsory required in every public sector, whether it is a bank or any other domain. This cannot be wished away. In case while the vigilance work or the official language work, if the government permits outsourcing on a case-to-case basis, a lot of cost can serve. But I think there is a parliamentary committee on official language which would never cede to this type of a proposal for making a political statement about it. We want the official language to be used. Indeed, we do want it, but now, as you said, the working area of official language is almost converted into automated. Now you can have your passbook entered in Hindi or English. Am I correct?
Right.
You can have both automated, and a lot of Google translation is already available. Similarly, in any other language, I think the passbooks can be updated. They're very freely available. So those areas where earlier it used to be there, those areas have become defunct, infectious. So official language, accepting and the name port, you are not going to check every branch and go and say whether the name board is in bilingual and all. It's all very automatically. It can be done through a video inspection. The name boards or the ledgers or all those things. So lot of things can be outsourced, or maybe a lot of cost can be reduced on this. So this will also enable banks to do much more slim and efficient way.
Now, let's wrap this up, and let's say that there are reforms being instituted. It's taking time, but it is going in the right direction. Let's assume for a moment what in your opinion is the time it will take for things to come to a point where India can set up and say, now we are in a position to loan the right initiative, the right MSME project, and so on and so forth? 2021, 2022, 2025. What is your thoughts on that?
I will tell you one thing. See, up to 1991, we were in an economic mess. The industry, I had already written about this on your P Gurus,
Yes.
about the size wariness. Although I had written it in the context of agriculture, but the size wariness, the risk wariness of ingrained into the major investors in India, major industrial investors in India. They need small scale is one thing. Generally, there is a sort of a wariness to invest. That wariness has to be countered through a lot of ease of doing business methods. The government in 2004 itself had started this initiative. A lot of digitalization has happened, but at the state level, state government level, not much more needs to be done, excepting in certain better administered states like the Gujarat, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, combine both the places together. Maybe Tamil Nadu and Haryana has done a lot of things recently, and Punjab. Madhya Pradesh is also. Madhya Pradesh is a very unique, very unique situation that the western part of Madhya Pradesh is rapidly industrializing. But the eastern part, I don't know why it's a laggard. I don't know. But the state government is same. So these type of, but to get some projects cleared, if you want to set up a tannery in Bengal, Calcutta has been a very traditionally favorite place for tanners, but go through that, it will be a challenge to you. I challenge everybody that it is really a challenge. I'm told UP, lot of improvements have happened in the last 2 years. I don't know the real situation, but there are a lot of very positive reports coming from UP. Similarly, Maharashtra is sinking. One of the most prosperous, highest tax contributing states. It is losing its luster. It is losing its luster. Now, only a real estate lobby is handling the government for quite a few years now. And I don't know what is going to happen to Maharashtra. Existing plants are also now migrating to South Gujarat, Saurashtra and all, which is a cause of concern. Even there is a talk of the stock market also shifting to Ahmedabad. I'm not sure whether it is going to happen, but we don't know. So these are all very warning signals. So what one man can do, because there are, let us be very clear, there need to be the commerce minister's agenda should be brought down. The honorable prime minister should seriously think of, see, now that the budgeting part of railway has been taken away, the honorable prime minister should seriously think of bringing a very young, good, excellent Minister of State independent charge for railways, because we have burdened our friend Piyush Goyal. Similarly, MSME should also be brought out, because either the rapid infrastructure with a huge infrastructure ministry like surface transport, which has been given to Mr. Nitin Gadkari. I know Nitin Gadkari is an excellent minister. He's very efficient, but the burden is too much on him. So these type of burdens should be eased. So ministers should be given clear targets, asked to focus, and I think 2024 around that time we will have better things to see, as you had speculated 24, just on the onset of election. But these are all very urgently required. We require to ease the pressure on the commerce and industry minister. That's very important. Similarly, we need to ease the pressure on the infrastructure minister like Mr. Nitin Gadkari, and MSME should be given to some other able minister he should be able to find. These two things have to happen, because we are losing time. I'm not making any value judgment on anybody's performance, But for a better focus, these two things have to happen. And similarly, Smriti Irani should also be given some more. She's also having multiple charges. So these multiple charges should be revisited by the Honorable Prime Minister and come to and induct maybe a few more people in the cabinet. That's what I want to say.
Well, all good suggestions, Mr. Mani, and hopefully, there is an understanding of the task that is in front of the government. Let's hope that with COVID, a few things are forcibly reset, and that sort of makes you or that sort of forces you to take a step back, and look at things with a slightly bigger perspective in mind. Where are the problems? Where are the crybabies? Which ones need to be done fast? Certainly, what you explained about Maharashtra is a huge matter of concern, because that is the highest tax producing state. And if that is falling rapidly, then that would only mean that the collections from GST are going to be challenging. And that sort of drives the entire economic cycle in India. And that would be a big, big matter of concern. Thank you very much, Mr. Mani. This has been a bit of a long session, and we will be back with more such interesting discussions. Namaskar.
Namaskar.